that she does feel guilty and she feels very ashamed, but with good cause. She said she almost killed her own baby. Now, this was a hot summer day when the accident happened, and Dana was cutting the grass in the backyard on a lawnmower when all of a sudden she heard screams. And the screams were coming from her 2-year-old baby girl. Dana then realized that she accidentally had plowed over her daughter, almost cutting her in half. What happened was that beautiful afternoon turned into a bloody nightmare. Dana, take us back and tell us, if you can, what happened.
Well, we went outside to mow the grass. She rode on the lawnmower with her daddy all the time.
It was a riding lawnmower?
Mm-hmm.
And she used to go, your husband always would take her on the lawnmower.
Mm-hmm.
From when she was an infant.
Mm-hmm.
She was 2 years old when this happened?
Almost 2.
Almost
2. And we were mowing the grass. And
you and your daughter?
Yeah. And my little boy was in the house by the sliding glass doors. And we were mowing the grass, and we were having a good time singing and everything. And then I asked Erin to get off the lawnmower to move her toys out of the way, and I told her to make sure she got up on the porch when she got done. And I put her down, and when I made sure she was behind me, and I looked down to shift the gears, and when I looked back up, she was standing right in front of me. And before I could stop the lawnmower, she was under. So I was afraid to move. So I jumped off the lawnmower. And when I jumped off, I landed. I felt something soft on my hands. And I looked under, and it was parts of her bathing suit that she had on. And so I started screaming and yelling for her. And I couldn't see her anywhere, and I couldn't hear her, so I crawled around to the other side. And her head was sticking out where the lawnmower shoots out grass. And she was looking at me. And she kept saying, "Mommy, Mommy." And so I tried to get the lawnmower off of her, and I couldn't get it off.
You mean by lifting it off?
Mm-hmm. And so I ran in the house and called my mother-in-law, because she lived right across the street, and I told her to hurry and get some help, because Erin was hurt bad. And so I went back outside, and I was on the porch, and I looked up and I said, "God, you gotta help me." So I went over to the lawnmower, and I pushed it off of her. And when I looked down, there was nothing there. All I could see was her insides. And I kept thinking, I said, "God, I cannot let her die right here in front of me." And so I picked her up without even thinking about hurting her worse, and I walked her over to my mother-in-law's house. And I got in the car. I told her to go get my son. I got in the car, and we drove. We lived 5 miles out of town. And we met the ambulance on the outskirts of town. And I left the car running, and I opened the door, and all I remember is the EMT stepping out of the ambulance and saying, "Oh my God, oh my God."
They said that? Oh my God.
So they took her and put her in the ambulance. And I kept asking her, I said, "Is she going to be okay? Is she going to die? Don't let her die." And then she just looked at me and said, I really don't know." So we went to the hospital, which is only a couple of blocks away. And they had called ahead because it was so bad. And they had called a helicopter to come and get her. But on the way to town, she kept trying to get up. And she kept crying. And so I started singing "Jesus Loves Me" to her. And she laid down, and it was calm. And when we got there, they couldn't get an IV started. So they were cutting on her and everything. And I had to stop singing to her for a while, and she started screaming. And so the lady that was giving her oxygen told me to keep singing, so I started singing again, and she laid back down and was fine. And my husband was on jury duty, and so they called him, and when he got there, he said, "I want to see her." I said, "No, you don't." And he said, "I gotta see her." And before I could stop him, he went over and looked, and he almost passed out. And so when the helicopter got there, the head of the trauma unit, Dr. Carl Boyd, came with him, and he told us to go in the other room because he had to see what was wrong with her. So we went in the other room, and all I could think was, God, I've killed my baby. And he came back in and he said that she was going to be fine, but she had a long, long road ahead of her for us to go home and packing because we were going to be at the hospital a long time. And I wanted to go on the helicopter with him, but they wouldn't let me. So we left the hospital and we drove home, and I called my parents because they live in Pennsylvania, and we packed real fast and we went down there. And all the way down there, all I kept thinking was, God, she thinks I want her dead.
That's when the guilt first started, right?
I said, she's got to know I love her. And I knew she had to have been scared because she was so little, and all those people.
Sure, people she didn't know.
Were sticking her and probing her and everything. And we got to the hospital. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes to get there. And we got there just in time for me to see her before they took her to surgery. And she had tubes all in her nose, and she had a heart monitor on. And she was so swollen. If I wouldn't have known it was my daughter, I wouldn't have recognized her. And her leg was in a cast, or they had elevated it. And she saw me, and she just held out her hand, and she said, "Mommy." And I got to see her just for a minute before they took her back. And she was in surgery for 3 hours that time, but it was only to get all the grass and the grease
out
and the dirt out. And when they came back out, they told me that she was severely hurt and that she would be there for quite a while. And they told me that her back was gone from her shoulder blades down to her little rear end and all the way across. And they said that her right leg was, her upper right femur bone in her leg was fractured. And when we finally got to go upstairs and see her, we had to wait, and she had to go to the pediatrics ICU. And I was crying, of course, and the nurse came out. And she said, "I know it hurts, but you've got to be strong for her.
That's right.
She needs you now." And so I tried to quit crying, and we went over there to her. And she had an oxygen mask on. Both of her hands were bandaged up. She was all bandaged up. She had a cast on her leg. And they couldn't get the IV started anywhere but in her neck. So she was all bandaged up on her neck.
It's like trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, is it not?
I was just glad to be with her again, though.
And you say to yourself, what do people say to each other, the husband and the wife, when something like that happens and when you're alone? How is your daughter Erin today?
She's doing wonderful.
Is she? Well, this 5-year-old Erin will do this now. My goodness, you look good. Do you know that when you came out, We were going to a break, and so we gave just some applause. And you know what I'd like to do? This applause, Erin, is for you, all right? Erin, how are you doing? Erin has had 11 surgeries, is that correct?
More.
More. And she was in the hospital about 5.5, at least 5.5 weeks. And Mother still has tears in her eyes, but Erin looks, does Mother cry? I don't know, I could tell. Do you know why she cries so much? She cries so much because she loves you very much, and she's really worried. My next guest, and this is something we want to talk about as a group, also blames herself for the scars on her 5-year-old's face. This is another Erin, grown-up Erin and a child Erin. Erin says that a simple daily chore of ironing almost killed her little girl. Erin, what happened that day?
I had been ironing my husband's shirts for work. My 3-year-old was sleeping in bed, taking his afternoon nap, and my daughter was only 9 weeks old. She was sitting behind me in a chair in her infant seat, taking her afternoon nap. I had chosen to do the ironing then because I knew you never ironed with a toddler around. My son woke up, and I turned off the iron, unplugged it, went up and got him, brought him down, turned on Sesame Street for him, went out to the kitchen to get a glass of juice, and while I was in the kitchen, the ironing board tipped over, and the iron fell into the baby's infant seat and onto the baby's face. When I heard her screaming, I came running back in the room, threw off the iron, picked my daughter up, and I immediately knew that I had to get her under some cold water. I went to the kitchen faucet and put her under, and then realized that I couldn't run water in my baby's face because I was going to drown her. I went to the telephone and called 911 and managed to get the information out to the operator. They always ask so many details. The baby was screaming, and my son at that point, because he was also a baby, was screaming. I hung up the phone, and I went running across the street to the neighbor's house with just my daughter. I believe I left my son in the house. Someone came over and got him, and the ambulance came, and the baby was screaming, and you could see her face beginning to swell up, and I knew how bad the burns were. They were turning white already. We got in the ambulance with her, and we started off to the hospital. Mary Catherine, my baby, and my son Adam, and myself. And in the back, they kept saying to keep the baby crying, and I looked back, and they kept shaking her every time she started crying.
Keep her to cry.
Yes, they wanted her to scream. I didn't understand then why they wanted my baby crying. They kept just shaking her to get her to cry. We got to the hospital, and Mary's daddy was there, and they immediately took her into the emergency room, and we weren't allowed to go with her. We went to a small room, and they brought out a social worker to talk to us and ask us what happened, and I just wanted to know how Mary was. And finally a doctor came out and said to me that they had good news and bad news. And the good news was that my little girl was going to live. But the bad news was she would be scarred for the rest of her life. She had a horrible burn over her eye and on her face. And all I kept thinking was, I didn't mean to do this. I was just trying to be a good mom and a good wife and do my ironing, take care of my family. And finally they let me see Mary in the emergency room before they took her up to the burn unit, which is, and we have a special burn unit in one of our hospitals, which we were very lucky for because it was only a half hour from our home. They, when we went in, Mary's face was so swollen I couldn't see her eyes or her mouth or anything. I mean, it was just huge. You wouldn't recognize her. And she had some burns on her chest where the water had, because it was a steam iron, the water had come out and gotten through her clothing, and we hadn't seen those. And a little burn on her finger where it's slightly disfigured now. And they took Mary up to the burn unit. And they took very good care of her there. And they kept saying that I had to be strong for my little girl. And my husband was there with me, and he was very supportive, and our families. But the hardest part of all was, in order to take care of Mary Catherine, in order to take care of a burn victim's burns, you have to constantly remove the healed scabs and constantly scrape them off.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and they also decided that it would be to Mary's benefit to do a skin graft immediately on her, which meant that she'd have to go to surgery and have the skin, all the dead tissue removed from her face to lessen the risk of infection. And they would take a patch of skin from her bottom and put it on her face, and we would be causing her another scar on her bottom when we chose to do the skin graft, because the graft site never looks the same again where they took the skin from. My husband and I decided that we would go with what the doctors felt best for the baby and do that. And it was a long 4 weeks that she was in the hospital. And I'm not sure how we got through it all, but we managed to. And since then, Mary's had 3 other operations, and we've had to make decisions for her future that have been extremely hard, in the fact that we chose to do a tissue expansion, which meant causing her more scars on her shoulder, in order to put new skin on her face that would be a better facial match.
Will she have more?
Yes,
She'll have
probably. Most likely, as she grows up, she'll probably have to have more surgery. And
so they keep doing it as her skin grows?
yes, if the graft doesn't grow at the same rate as her face.
That's right, the graft has to.
Yes, it has to expand, and it has to stay nice and smooth and keep from pulling. Scars tend to pull quite a bit.
Could we bring her out, and could we meet her?
Yes.
Okay. Mary? Sure hasn't it affected her inside, has it?
No, she's very strong-willed and very stubborn.
Well, was she, you know, there's no way of telling whether she was like that because she was so young beforehand.
Oh, yes. I had
Really?
a special bond with Mary. She came into this world screaming her little heart
Really?
out.
Was born like that, huh?
Yes.
Well, I think you look pretty terrific, and you know what? That's really the miracle of modern science, isn't
Yes.
it?
She has wonderful doctors.
Sometimes we say things about the medical profession, and God knows they deserve it, but there are times when it's like taking care of Mary and Aaron that we have to say, gosh, you know, through God to you and thank you. When we return, we're going to hear from a mother who watched in horror as her husband ran over her little daughter with the family van. We'll be right back. Thank God that children heal so well. I mean, you know, that's the redeeming thing, I think. And also, thank heavens that there's a point at which you can look at it and say, okay, I can forgive myself. I don't know what stage our mothers are at, but probably will ask them. I was telling the mothers that we all do something. I dropped one of my daughters on her head when she was about this age. And, you know, it goes years and years, and every time she acts out, I thought, well, it has to be, because I'm the one. I think that's a very common thought that most mothers have. Imagine if something happened with the car. If you ran over your child while you're backing, the car is backing out of the driveway, and that's really what happened to my next guest's daughter. This is Karen. Actually, it was Karen's husband who was driving the car, but it was Karen who watched the accident in horror and has that feeling that I have always had of guilt for what happened. Why did you feel guilty?
Well, the thing was, is we all just got back from a nice afternoon dinner. My husband had to go someplace, and I had both the children with me.
Children were how old?
My son is 3. My daughter was 18 months. I forgot to tell my husband something. I went outside. I closed the door. I went to the car. I mean, I was there for maybe a minute. I gave him a kiss goodbye and turned around, started going towards the house, and for some reason, I just turned back towards him. At that point, I saw my daughter, Kara, and she had got out of the house into our alley, and at that point, I just screamed, and she fell underneath my husband's wheel. The car went over her. There was nothing we could do to stop it. I just wanted to, you know, I tried to get to her in time, but I just couldn't.
How, at that, she was in the house and she'd gotten herself out of the house all the way across the lawn or whatever
Down
it was?
steps, into the lawn, up steps.
And up steps?
Yeah, she's very active.
My goodness. And she was falling. When you called for her, she fell under the car and he was backing out?
He was going forward.
Forward.
He went right over her. And he was in a van.
What did you do?
I ran in the house and called 911. I thought that's the best thing to do. I went back out. David was gone, Carol was gone, and I mean, I was just kind of crazy. I was like, what happened to them, you know? And of course, David had the good sense to just pick her up and take her to the hospital. And when the police arrived and took me to the hospital, well, when I arrived at the hospital, I found out that Kara had died on the way to the hospital. She died about 5 minutes before David took her to the hospital. And it took him...
Who told you that? What did they say?
David. She was dead on arrival.
Your husband said he's dead on arrival. DOA.
It took them about 5 to 6 minutes to revive Kara, but they did. They revived her, and then the doctor came in and said, we have to operate on Kara within the hour or she'll be dead. They didn't have time to do x-rays or anything like that, so they didn't even know what they were operating on. They just had to open her up because they knew she was bleeding internally. So they operated on her and came in and said, she's all right. I mean, she's critical. She's very critical, but she's all right for the moment. She said she'll probably get worse before she gets better. So 2 days later...
You see, I can't even put myself in your position of the fear, then the baby died, then no, she didn't die. And, I mean, that is so inhuman to have to go through that. And the hours go on the operating table. How many hours?
I don't even know. It was a long time. It was probably about 6 or 7 hours before I got to see her again. When I went in to see her, I couldn't recognize her. She didn't even look like my daughter. And so she hung in there for a day or two, but 2 days later she started getting worse, and they had to put her on. They said, we'll do one more thing for you, for her, but it's mainly for your benefit. They put her on this ECMO machine to give her heart and lungs a rest. It took the blood out of her body and put oxygen in it, and then put it back in her blood.
Let me understand something. After 2 days, when she took a turn for the worse, did they pretty much gave up on her?
Oh, they told her she probably wouldn't live.
So you've been through this hell for 48 hours?
Yeah, and then they said if she did live, she'd probably be severely brain damaged, or she would, you know, putting her on this machine could cause stroke, internal bleeding, and since she already had internal bleeding, they said it just probably wouldn't work, but they wanted to tell us they did everything they could. So before they put her on the machine, she had a cardiac arrest, and they had to revive her again. I had her baptized and had her last rites read to her, and they put her on that machine, and a few hours later, I went back and looked at her, and she was starting to look like my baby again. I mean, the swelling went down, and she was starting to get color in her skin. She was still scratched up, but I knew she was going to be all right then. And then she was out of it. I mean, they had her so medicated, you know, for weeks. When she finally was allowed to wake up, we realized that she was blind. She couldn't see. And so my husband was really upset by it. And I just felt that it was going to be all right, that she was going to regain her sight. And so about a month later, my mother-in-law was reading her a book, and she started pointing at the pictures. The doctor came in, and she could see.
Let's meet Karen's miracle child, Karen. Take a break. We'll be right back. We needed some help here today, don't we all? Always. Please meet pediatrician Dr. John Cohen. Dr. Cohen, I've got a lot of questions for you. Let's go back to Karen's case. You talk about medical miracles. A baby is DOA. They tell them it's not going to live after 2 days, then brain damage, then it's going to be blind. Are there more of these miracles than we know about? I mean, that's, to me...
There really are. I mean, there's your miracle. She may still need some more time to pick up with her development. But yes, I have a child in my own practice where, again, a tire ran over the child's head with tire marks. And the child is one of twins and is exactly the same as her sister now, approximately 1 year after injury. Kids have amazing recuperability. They're amazing. Absolutely amazing. God. You don't win them all, but they can do amazing things.
And is it that often that the doctors are wrong about the child being dead, or I mean, imagine being in a room and having them come out and tell you that the child is gone.
I think most physicians today try to be as honest as they can with a parent, and they don't like to hold anything back. And in doing so, you have to call it as you see it right then. And the problem is that kids don't call it that way. I mean, kids are funny. Kids wear their scars differently than adults do. They don't even mind them. They don't pay attention.
She seems, you know, just sitting there, and we gave her, she had the juice, take out the passport, put in the juice, have a good time, you know, what the heck.
After her last surgery, she just had a new skin graft done 2 months ago. They brought my baby out from the operating room. Her entire head was bandaged except for one eye and a small piece on her mouth. She wore those bandages for an entire week, ate every meal, did everything with us. It was just incredible. An adult would have been laying there moaning and groaning, and
that's right. That's absolutely right. Now, could these accidents have been prevented?
Well, you know, Sally, I mean, any accident can be prevented by its basic definition, but accidents happen. In my practice, I have similar types of accidents that have happened with my own patients. And yes, you believe that every accident is preventable, but they're not all preventable. They just go on. We've all, I think if we looked around the audience, all of us have done something to our kids. My son, though the scar doesn't show because he had plastic surgery, had that happen to him because of me. I was callous. I was careless.
What did you do?
Oh, I was wheeling a wheelbarrow in my backyard, and my, at that time, 4-year-old said, let me do it, let me do it. And I said, sure, okay, try it. And my, at that time, 18-month-old was maundering next to it, and she dropped it, like they all do. And the handle fell out of the wheelbarrow and hit him across the mouth, and it crossed right through here. It was healed, and it was done. I didn't feel too good about it.
Sure. Talk to us about the mothers and the guilt. That's a natural...
First the anxiety, then the guilt, and then it is something which is difficult to deal with, but if parents can watch their kids and watch their kids come out of it, then I think they can handle the guilt and handle the problems that go on after it a little bit better.
You can put her down. Let her run around. It's my house. Let her. It's nothing she can break. My next... My next guest says her worst nightmare came when she accidentally ran over her little boy as she was backing out of the driveway. You were in the car, right?
Yes, yeah.
This is Mary Alice. This happened now 2 weeks ago. Tell me about what happened.
Well, I'm still getting over the guilt a lot in the sense that we were all going to the pool, bringing the neighborhood kids to the pool, and I have a 13-year-old little boy that, you know, babysits with a few of his friends kind of when I'm just running to the grocery store, and they were all in the back of the car. I have a station wagon, and I asked him to close the back door. And when I did, he went to close the back door, and I watched in my rearview mirror that he was pulling it closed, and so I thought everything was fine. And at that point, I had my car in reverse, and then I took my foot off the brake, and at that point, I started to roll down. It was like a little incline on the driveway. So I, you know, continued to drive, and all of a sudden, I felt a crunch. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've run over the curb. That's my first instinct, you know, thinking the door had been closed already. And I looked in my rear view mirror, and the little boy had also said to me at that time when I felt the crunch, "Stop, Mrs. Drewer." So I jammed on my brake, and I thought, oh my God. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was no Matthew's head. So I thought, oh my God, I didn't know what to do. I was kind of in a state of shock. So I threw it into drive and just moved up enough, thinking I was on him with my tire. I didn't know at that point. And I jumped out of my car and went around to the side, and he was laying underneath the tire with the tire mark on his back. And I thought, oh my God, I was in shock. And what had happened was he had reached, after the door had been closed, it wasn't closed all the way, and he had reached to close it again, and then he slipped out at that time. So it was a matter of seconds, and I just couldn't believe it had happened. So I picked him up naturally, thinking the only thing to do, and I thought, I know I probably shouldn't be moving him, but I just had to. You know, he was laying there and crying. So I picked him up, and I brought him over to the grass and put him down, and I just started, you know, rubbing his hair and saying, "Matthew, are you okay?" And I'm asking him to move his arms and his legs. And I know I probably shouldn't have done that also, but I just didn't know what to do because I felt so helpless. And at that point, I have twins that are 3.5 boys as well, and they're all running around him, crying, saying, Mommy, what's wrong? And Matthew's crying, saying, Mommy, please don't let me die. And I was beside myself, and a neighbor happened to be outside at the time and yelled over, asked me if I needed an ambulance, and I said, please. So I just waited for the ambulance to show up, and 2 ambulance and 2 fire and 2 police cars all came into our cul-de-sac. And I laid there, I just looked at him, and I thought, oh, I cannot believe this has happened, you know, and I didn't know what to do. And the next thing I know, I saw a helicopter hovering overhead. What had happened was the rescue squad had called because of the car incident with a child. And the next thing you know, they're cutting his clothes off of him, and I was in shock, I guess. I felt faint. It was 2 weeks ago. It was one of those 90, 100-degree days in the middle of the day, and it was just awful. And you know, the policeman saying, "May I have your license?" And you know, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you know, I'll tell you who I am or anything, you know, take my purse, whatever, just to get my identification. But that's the last thing I was thinking, you know, was who, you know, how has this happened and all that. And then they took him by ambulance to a patch of area where they could land the helicopter, and I begged them to let me go with him, and they said I couldn't.
They won't do that, I know.
And he cried and cried and cried, and they would not let me go with him. And I think the worst part about the whole incident was the fact, thank God, he only had minor scrapes on his leg and his arm, and I guess the wheel had really just grazed his body, or if anything, it didn't really run over him. But no internal injuries whatsoever.
Did you bring Matthew with you?
Yes, I did.
Matthew, where are you? Take a break, we'll be right back. Children and miracles go very well together, as somebody in our audience said. Dr. Cohen, there are a lot of questions, one of which is, should she have moved the baby? I know you said you couldn't leave. The normal thing is, if there's been a car accident and the child is lying there, it is normal for any mother or father to want to go and pick the child up. I'm told that we shouldn't do that. Is that
That's right. Yeah. Well, what you worry about is severe injuries to the back or spine. And what you really want to do is look at your child. You're in shock. There's absolutely nothing more than that. Are they breathing? If they're breathing, are they pink? Are they bleeding from someplace profusely? You don't need to pick them up necessarily. You can see with your eyes, and then you can go to your child. You can comfort them. You can touch them.
But don't move them.
Don't pick them up and bounce them around because you just don't know what injuries might happen. Yes.
If you're on a highway and an accident happens, this has happened in our family, you get someone to stop the traffic and you leave the child there, or you remove the child from the highway?
I think if it's in the middle of the highway and it's a potentially dangerous area, you do the best you can with a group of bystanders to move the child without trying to move them. I've had that happen.
You have had that? I have had that happen too in our family.
You just can't stand there waiting for some crazy person to make a mistake and come down the highway.
Yeah, somebody would come down, and that would be the worst.
You know, one of the other pieces of it that's very important is, and I think it's happened to some of the mothers, is they end up frequently being questioned as if they did it, as if it's abuse.
Who questions them as if they did it?
Because there's so much question about abuse nowadays, and because we think we miss it. I have seen this happen to people who have gone into the hospital. One of my patients, it took a long time before the neurosurgeon stopped blaming the mother for having caused the injury in her 3-month-old because it was so implausible to have come the way it was explained. Turned out the mother was correct. It wasn't her fault. But child abuse has to be separated out from true accidents.
So medical practitioners have to realize it isn't all child abuse, and to be a little careful before you say, gosh, you shouldn't have done this to your child.
How will this affect them later on in life emotionally and physically?
Well, will they feel guilty? No, will the kids feel angry to the parent who did this? I mean, you know, think about that.
If they come from a warm, loving environment, look at these kids. If they come from a warm, loving environment, what happens is the kids put that in their own heads in a little corner. They understand it, and they handle it pretty well.
So my feeling would be that if the child has a scar, for example, like that, what's she going to think about the mother?
Well, they don't. I don't think
I worry about that all the time. What happens if Mary Catherine, as a normal teenage girl, hates me because her face is not beautiful? What happens if she doesn't get a date to the prom? I know we say she's beautiful inside, but still society is so much judges a person by the way they look. And I don't want her to hate me, but I realize that there's a chance we might go through a difficult period, and we'll have to deal with that.
You'll go through difficult, but with what you see about how you interact, it'll come out better than what you think. I've seen one girl who was a beautiful girl who had an injury to the side of her lip from an electrical cord. As an infant, she chewed on a cord, leaves a scar that cannot be corrected. And this woman was a beautiful woman, understood what it was, put it in the right corner, didn't like the fact that she had it, but she was performing pretty well in life.
I don't think they have anything to feel guilty about, and I think their faith in God helped them get through it.
Sure.
But no lawnmowers. Right? Let's talk about that, because you wrote me a letter saying you wanted to discuss what you'd tell parents. No lawnmowers.
Well, with even everybody that lives around us, you know, knew what happened to Aaron, you know, and we'd still, you know, ride down the road, and there'd be small children on the lawnmower with their parents, you know.
After the accident in their own neighborhood.
Yes. Lawnmowers, three-wheel balloon vehicles. Look at the number of kids we've now got in bicycle helmets. Fantastic. We're really working. Now it's a rarity that a child isn't in a seatbelt in a car. I mean, anytime you see that, say something to somebody, even though you may not be doing something you'd like to.
I'm curious to know how the doctors were able to put Aaron's back together.
She had plastic surgery. She had skin grafts, in which that she would have to lay on her stomach like weeks at a time without getting up at all. And they took grafts from her legs and from her rear end and just put the skin back on. And just recently, she had tissue expanders in her back also. And they were so big on the inside that it was moving her ribs on the inside. And when they took those out in April, they were able to cover her whole scar. She still has a pretty bad scar on her back now, but it's nothing like it was before.
One thing that I would like to say is, first of all, that I truly commend all you mothers. You're really brave, and I don't know, I've actually learned a lesson from this. And the second thing that I want to know is, how would you actually explain to your child when they get older what you've done to them when they ask you?
Well, with Erin, since she's as old as she is now, she doesn't remember a single thing about the accident. She doesn't remember getting hurt. She doesn't remember being in the hospital. Nothing, you know. And she just knows about the pain that she's gone through from October till now, because those tissue expanders were real painful. And she had to go in once a week and have injections where they put 8 shots in her back every time, and she would scream, and so she doesn't remember.
What do you think, Karen?
Well, I would just tell her the truth, you know, and tell her everything that happened, because I think that's the only thing you can do about it.
Yeah, you can't hide anything from them. You have to be honest. Very honest.
I've even gotten a picture of her back the day it happened and showed it to her.
So that you could tell
to let her know, you know.
Doctor, I want to ask you, we'll do this in the next section. What happens? I would be afraid I'd freak. I would be afraid that I couldn't get to the phone, or I don't know what but what happens when the mother really loses it? We'll be right back. I really mean I'd lose it.
They are. It is something which usually freezes anyone up. But if you're faced with this with your child, this is yours. You created this child. Then you have to do something, and you holler for neighbors. You go with your car somewhere. Amazing how most parents pull it from within themselves just enough to get help.
Find a way of doing it. 2 quick questions. Yes.
Yes, when a tragedy such as this happens to a family, I would think that this causes a great strain between husband and wife. How have your husbands dealt with this, with any of you or all of you?
My husband and I have gotten closer from this. This has made us closer because we had to pull together to get Kara out of this, to get her well, and that just brought us closer as a family, our whole family.
See, I would think that there's sitting there thinking, does he blame me while you're waiting during the operation? He's going to say, you should have shut off the iron, or you should have, I mean, maybe I just think that way, I don't know.
No, but you do.
No, it goes through your mind like that.
I mean, wouldn't I be looking at my husband? I'd be apologizing to him. I'm sorry.
But I think...
Yeah,
right?
I think they're also aware, though, that it could very well have happened to them if in the situation where, I mean, it could have been as easily for them to do the same thing in my husband's situation.
I just, want to say that being an expectant mother now, I worry about everything. Yeah. And I really would love to know from all of you, how do you become more overprotective now of the children? I mean, has this made you, like, so neurotic that, you have to watch every move they make?
Definitely.
Definitely. And remember that Erin was saying that Dana cries all the time, which we're going to stop you from doing one way or the other. Take a break. We'll be right back.
Transcript of this program, send $3 to Transcripts, Sally Jessy Raphael, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007, or call 212-227-READ.
Talk about overprotective moms. I'm a prime case. You may be asking where the fathers are. They did not want to come on. This was mother time, and we would like to see you again, Dr. Cohen. Pleasure. And we wish all of you, you've been very wonderful stars, doing very well, thank you. Thank you for being with us. Helped us.
Some members of our audience will receive, and a promotional fee has been provided by...
In need of medical care or have medical facility bills you can't afford, help may be available under the Federal Hill-Burton program. Call 1-800-638-0742.
So much news, so little time. What could we do? The choices were simple. Either speed things up or expand it. We chose option number 2. That's why Monday through Friday at 10, we're giving you 5 extra minutes of news. And don't despair, sports fans. Fridays are reserved for the 5th quarter, when we fill those extra minutes with scores and highlights from the area's high school sports. Why the change? Because we're the source. WLUK News 11.